Well, welcome everybody. Let me start my slideshow here. And I'm not sure what this crazy red line is about, but can anyone tell me why that is showing up all of a sudden?
I don't see a red line.
Oh, good. Okay, maybe it's just on my screen. All right.
I see it too, Jerry.
I see it too. Yeah.
You may have accidentally used a pencil or something on it. Yeah.
It's just like a little hair. Not too.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it, Jay.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
It's Kamadeva. It's Kamadeva, Jerry.
I'll train myself to ignore it. But anyhow, welcome everybody. This is our fall lecture series for the Universal Theosophy website. And I wanted to welcome all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we have people from all over at different time zones. The format for today and for the next 3 weeks is kind of a forum setting. We've got several speakers for each one of our topics. Tonight and today is thought. The next week we'll take up creativity. We'll have 3 speakers for that event. And then on the last Saturday of the month, kindness. And again, of course, we're talking about human potential, and we're trying to look at this from a theosophical perspective. I would appreciate it if everyone could mute their mics. We're going to have a group of speakers, and then at the end, we will have a short discussion period so that you'll have a chance to speak and to share your thoughts or to put something in the chat, and I'll give you some instructions about the discussion section when we get to it. I'm actually going to be starting off today, but before I do, I just wanted to pass on a vote of thanks to my fellow students in our various discussion groups that we have here at Universal Theosophy. I have been very inspired and uplifted by all of my fellow students who I get to study with. And I just wanted to make a shout out to all of you, because a lot of the things that I have to say are the fruit of some of the wonderful discussions we've been having over the last year or two. Okay. It's not uncommon to hear people say after some blunder, "After all, I'm only human." This sentiment, albeit innocent and lighthearted, reveals a deeper malaise, a more fundamental self-doubt lurking under the surface. Isn't it also distinctly human to be heroic, creative, thoughtful, sacrificial, and kind? Yet in our times, there appears to be a perverse pleasure in dwelling upon human shortcomings. The wretched history of man's inhumanity to man is well documented. Modern man's opinion of himself is depressingly low. Mahatma Gandhi observed that recorded history, and we could add the news itself, is more often than not a chronicle of man's misdeeds. Gandhi went on to say that goodwill, kindness, sacrifices, creative innovation, all of these things that sustain human families and communities goes largely unrecorded. Human potential, as with human nature, is such that man must soar or sink, to borrow another line from Mahatma Gandhi. What could we honestly say is there that is more unknown than known about human potential? But alas, many reductionist theories about human nature have taken root in the industrialized world that weigh down upon us. The movie industry seems entranced by the destructive side of human nature. This situation can be traced back to at least two very different strains of thought from the past. Organized religion has for centuries espoused the notion of man's inherent sinfulness. It preaches the doctrine of human weakness and the need for an outside agency required for redemption. The banishment of independent philosophical investigation from religious life was replaced by blind belief and fealty as the measures of devotion. As the onward march of science began to erode this iron grip over the minds of men, particularly in the West, academic circles in human evolution took their turn evaluating human nature and human potential. Sadly, a predominantly materialistic view of man as a higher animal began to compete with superstitious religious views, leading to a newly truncated views of the origins of man and the composition of human nature. Between the literal interpretation of Adam and Eve's story and humanity emerging from the cave with clubs, there was not much room for hope in measuring the full range of human potential. And this despite the evidence of the work of people like Einstein or the plays of Shakespeare or the music of Mozart. The primary danger in reductionist theories of human potential, we've been told, is not so much that the theories might be true, but rather that we will make them true by our so believing. For all our vaunted pride in technology and modern education, we collectively know very little about human potential, little less the complete story of the human odyssey. And how can we know the extent of our potential if we do not know our origins, understand our past, and plumb the depths of consciousness itself, which lies at the heart of our being? Modern man suffers from a profound disrespect and ignorance of the ancients. Modern man has developed a smug sense of superiority over all previous times and eras. It was the intention of H.P. Blavatsky to brush back and push back against these theories in The Secret Doctrine and offer a glimpse into a largely hidden side of the human story. How much do we really know about the humanities of the past? Ancient Brahmin teachers, echoing the esoteric tradition, claim humanity's time on this earth dates back not thousands of years, not tens of thousands of years, but rather millions of years. The Secret Doctrine of HPB concurs with these Indian timetables describing seemingly endless manvantaras, pralayas, and yugas. The Secret Doctrine suggests humanity in our present physical condition has lived upon this earth for over 18 million years. This timetable is the scheme known to sages and seers from time immemorial. And Susan has a passage to share with us from the Secret Doctrine.
The Secret Doctrine is the accumulated wisdom of the ages, and its cosmogony alone is the most stupendous and elaborate system, even in the exotericism of the Puranas. But such is the mysterious power of occult symbolism that the facts, which have actually occupied countless generations of initiated seers and prophets to marshal, to set down and explain, in the bewildering series of evolutionary progress, are all recorded on a few pages of geometrical signs and glyphs. The flashing gaze of those seers has penetrated into the very kernel of matter and recorded the soul of things there where an ordinary profane, however learned, would have perceived but the external work of form. But modern science believes not in the soul of things and hence will reject the whole system of ancient cosmogony. It is useless to say that the system in question is no fancy of one or several isolated individuals, that it is the uninterrupted record covering thousands of generations of seers whose respective experiences were made to test and to verify the traditions passed orally by one early race to another of the teachings of higher and exalted beings who watched over the childhood of humanity. That for long ages, the wise men of the fifth race, out of the stock saved and rescued from the last cataclysm and shifting of continents, had passed their lives in learning, not teaching. How did they do so? It is answered by checking, testing, and verifying in every department of nature the traditions of old by the independent visions of great adepts, men who have perfected and developed their physical, mental, psychic, and spiritual organizations to the utmost possible degree. No vision of one adept was accepted till it was checked and confirmed by the visions, so obtained as to stand as independent evidence, of other adepts, and by centuries of experiences. From The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, page 272.
If you put 18 million years into a 24-hour time frame, 8,000 years ago, a time dating back to the Egyptians, occurred only a couple of minutes ago. What is the human story for the remaining 23 hours and 50 plus minutes, a length of time geologically sufficient to span the shifting of the continents, burying the past in the great oceans of today? As we take on the topic of thought and human potential and try to look at it from a theosophical perspective, it's critical that we start with the metaphysics. And to help us to understand some of the metaphysics behind the theosophical perspective in relation to human potential, we're going to ask our good friend Pierre Waters for some assistance.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, like Jerry pointed out, and it's something that we're not always aware of, that is that probably about 99% of our life and existence consists of metaphysics, because the only thing that is truly physical is just our perception. Once that you start discussing that subject, you're dealing with metaphysics. And so with regard to this subject of potentiality, is that a real thing? Is that something that we infer after the facts? Once that something has manifested, we say, well, there had to be a potentiality for it. And we all seem to accept it without any problem until we say, let's start talking about this metaphysics. Then people go like, ooh, metaphysics, you know. But in reality, metaphysics precedes everything that we do. Take the simple example, for instance, of a father who talks to his son on a Saturday afternoon, and that son is hanging out in his in the sofa watching some silly movie, and the father says, you know, instead of sitting there, why don't you do something? You have so much potential and you don't do anything with it. So the question would be then, well, how does the father know that there is such a thing as potential? He assumes something that he can't prove. He may say that on the basis of some things that his son may have done before, from which he extracts the idea that there is a potential present there. But he could cut up his son into pieces and look into the molecules and try to find potential in the molecules. And if he's a quantum physicist, he can divide them further up in subatomic particles, but you're not going to find that potential there. And it's also not a combination of any one of those particles. So, which basically then brings down the problem to metaphysics. Everybody, when saying such a thing, acts on a potential. And so that immediately enters the world of metaphysics, and nobody seems to be having a problem with it. So where is that potential, and is it solely human? And this question is in essence not so very different from asking, why is there anything at all, or what is the purpose of life? So Jerry asked me to deal with this question of, from the standpoint of the esoteric tradition, what are the metaphysical roots of human nature or human potential? And here's a very important point that you find expressed in the Secret Doctrine, where HPB says that Theosophy teaches that the more abstract you go into metaphysical ideas, the more real they become. So our apparent environment that we see around us with all these physical elements around us is the great illusion. So the higher you reach into abstractions and ideas, the more real it becomes, she says. So where does that eventually lead to? Well, at the top of the pyramid of the whole manifestation, HPB always refers to that idea of the absolute. And she also refers to the idea of the Pythagorean monad, for instance, the tetractys. She also brings up the idea of Fohat. And we have a tendency to see these things as separate things. Here is she talking about the absolute, here she's talking about the tetractys or the Pythagorean monad or the monads, and here she's talking about Fohat. But essentially, there's no distinction between all those things. Those distinctions only exist in our dual mind. And you find some of these explanations that she gives exemplified in that diagram that Jerry just brought up from the Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, page 200. And at the very top, we see the first plane there, of which HPB in the Secret Doctrine says, a plane that is no plane. So I'll leave it up to you what you think about that, the way she phrases that. Sometimes she refers to it as aloka, no plane, no place. And you could say that is actually the plane that is not a plane, where absolute potential exists. And if you want to connect that with the idea of, well, what does the Pythagorean monad have to do with it? HPB brings that up in the Secret Doctrine in volume 2 on page 626, where she says there are two tetragrammatons, the macroprosopus and the microprosopus. The first, the macroprosopus, is the absolute perfect square, or the tetractys, within the circle, both abstract conceptions. And it is therefore called Ein, the non-being, that is the illimitable or absolute beingness. So here we have an objective proof in the Secret Doctrine that when she speaks of the Pythagorean monad in its unmanifested condition, or the tetractys, that she's actually still talking about the absolute. And that is that it's not even infinite potentiality. We could call it absolute potentiality. And what is an absolute potentiality? That's a potentiality that is omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable. Once you step away from that, and for that, HPB very often uses words like the absolute throws a shadow of itself. That's a metaphor, of course, because on our plane, in order to have a shadow, you need an object that throws a shadow outside of itself, but there is nothing out of the absolute. The whole diagram that you see there is the absolute, is the tetractys, is at the same time Fohat. And if you think, well, Fohat is something that comes into play later. Well, HPB says in the transactions, you find that on page 38, she says, Fohat is a generic term and used in many senses. He is the light, the Daivi Prakriti, of all the three logoi. Usually we have the tendency to think of Fohat only in terms or in relation to the third logos, but here she says, it is the light of all the three logoi, the personified symbols of the three spiritual stages of evolution. You can read the rest for yourself. Now, in the Secret Doctrine, in volume 1 on page 109, she says the following, and that shows that that Fohat is actually also identical with the Absolute. And there she says, Fohat has naught to do with cosmos yet, since cosmos is not born and the gods still sleep in the bosom of Father Mother. He, Fohat, is an abstract philosophical idea. He produces nothing yet by himself. He, and here it is, he is simply that potential creative power in virtue of whose action the noumenon of all future phenomena divides. So here we have a clear proof that even Fohat is identical with the Absolute. And then she says in volume 2 on page 24, force then does not emerge with primordial substance from parabrahmic latency. Force is the transformation into energy of the supraconscious thought of the Logos, infused, so to speak, into the objectivation of the latter, and here it is, out of potential latency in one reality. So again, proof that when we speak of the Absolute, the Pythagorean tetractys, or monad, or Fohat, that we're actually talking about the same thing in its unmanifested condition. So in other words, absolute potentiality that metaphorically throws a shadow, and then manifestation actually starts with the first logos. That first logos then becomes then in turn infinite potentiality, because you can't say of the absolute that it has infinite potential, because that would be a definition. Infinite potentiality only starts with the manifestation of that tetractys, the Pythagorean monad, as the apex of that triangle that you see in the diagram. The first three planes there are referred to as arupa planes, and you will see that the apex on the second arupa plane, so the top of the triangle, doesn't even touch that first plane because it's no plane. It's aloka, no place. So manifestation really starts from that apex there, or the first logos. So it is the first logos that actually contains an infinite potential. That infinite potential moves into the second logos, which is, you could say, the substantial realm in which that infinite potential of the first logos manifests itself and is then reduced to cosmic potential or cosmic mind. Another word for that is also Mahat. And Mahat eventually becomes differentiated into distinct beings and the world around us on those four Rupa planes. Now, how does that connect then with human potential? Well, here is the rub. Since the human mind has a direct correspondence with cosmic mind, or Mahat, we see here that our human potential is directly related to a cosmic origin. As above, so below, as below, so above. So our power to, or potential to perceive, think, act, speak, etc., are all related in its ultimate essence to that infinite potential in every monad. So if you want to define then potential even within the absolute, there is just no beginning there, because The absolute cannot be defined. And that brings it back again to that idea of why is there anything at all? Why is there a manifestation? Well, if there is such a thing as an absolute potential, followed by an infinite potential, then what would be the purpose of potentiality if it would never express itself? Imagine that in the cosmos, you just have, even before there is a cosmos, that you have a potential. If that potential wouldn't do anything at all, you may as well throw the potential away because it's not doing anything at all. So everything is preceded by that potential. And that eventually lead to the idea that that once manifestation takes place, that potential becomes reduced in terms of having to manifest itself through vehicles and through senses. And we all know, especially on our plane, that that eventually leads to limitations. So our potential becomes limited by the vehicles and the senses that we use. Another element of that potential is also that monads that are evolving on lower levels in manifestation, they cannot reach up to a higher level without the help of higher developed monads who descend down to our plane to help us, which in a certain sense is an element of sacrifice, of course. It's the same as when you would go to college, you're a lower monad, you enter the class, and there's no professor. What are you going to do? There's no higher developed monad there to help you out. So all of this just goes to show that potentiality is fundamental and is at the apex of the whole of manifestation. And since there is that idea of as above, so below, that that cosmic potential reflects itself in the human mind as our human potential. So I would say that is pretty much the idea of where our human potential comes from. And again, friends, no matter what we say, it's always going to be limited. We can't say everything at the same time. And in fact, it can never really be expressed. The words that we use on our plane deal only with our manifested realm and are in essence not really sufficient to deal with these high metaphysical levels. So that's what I have to say about it, Jerry.
Much appreciated, Pierre. And after hearing that explanation, it makes all the more sense why we hear that and resonate to that great Greek notion of man is the microcosm of the macrocosm. So to continue on our discussion about thought and human potential, we're going to hear a reading from Susan from Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay on circles.
The key to every man is his thought. Sturdy and defying though he look, he has a helm which he obeys, which is the idea after which all his facts are classified. He can only be reformed by showing him a new idea which commands his own. The life of man is a self-evolving circle, which, from a ring imperceptibly small, rushes on all sides outwards to new and larger circles, and that without end. The extent to which this generation of circles, wheel upon wheel, will go depends on the force or truth of the individual soul. For it is the inert effort of each thought, having formed itself into a circular wave of circumstance, as, for instance, an empire, rules of an art, a local usage, a religious rite, to heap itself on that ridge and to solidify and hem in the life. But If the soul is quick and strong, it bursts over that boundary on all sides and expands another orbit on the great deep, which also runs up into a high wave with an attempt again to stop and to bind. But the heart refuses to be imprisoned. In its first and narrowest pulses, it already tends outward with a vast force and to immense and innumerable expansions.
Thought or thinking is an act of communion. It is the effort to connect the unmanifest to the manifest, the unknown to the known. It is distinctly human to think. We should think upon this and think deeply. How does mind build a bridge to knowledge? We know the word man comes from the Sanskrit term manas, which roughly translated means mind. It is a much richer term with broader connotations than the English word mind. Manas suggests mind engaged in the process of thinking, the activity of deliberation, the agency of perceiving. It is both a creative power and a receptive one. It is the bridge between two worlds, spans spirit and matter, the noumenal and the phenomenal. We should think upon this and think deeply. How can mind be both creative and receptive at the same time? It is the lighting up of manas, or mind, which initiates the capacity for self-reflection, which we know as self-consciousness. Unlike the kingdoms of nature below man, human beings can make themselves the object of their own observation. We can observe and evaluate not only our actions, but the activity of the mind and emotions itself. We can step back and reflect upon ourselves. Manas implies the capacity to occupy the posture of the witness on the one hand, and be participant in the world on the other. Thoreau called this dual enterprise of consciousness a strange sense of doubleness. We should think upon this and think deeply. What is acting? What is witnessing? The theosophical term manas has a dual meaning. It is both a higher and a lower dimension to it. But it is important to remember there is an unbroken continuity between higher and lower. In the end, manas is one, and ultimately all 7 human principles are one whole. Higher manas dwells and operates on a noetic, meaning hidden, abstract planes. Lower manas operates on the psychic, or more revealed planes, which includes, of course, the physical, astral, pranic, and kamic planes. Because manas is in both worlds, it has the potential to connect lower to higher. We should think upon this. Think deeply. What are noetic planes of consciousness? We have in the ancient Eastern traditions the idea of manas taijasi, or mind fully illuminated, enlightened, if you will. This is mind fully functional, operating on all cylinders, as we might say. This accounts for the potential to achieve states of consciousness so high, so profound, that they defy language or explanation. And for this reason, theosophical teachers tell us that the difference between a fully enlightened Buddha and an ordinary human being is roughly equivalent to the difference between an average person and a black beetle. In light of our topic concerning human potential, it is critical that we understand that this difference is one of degree and not of kind. We should think about this. Think deeply about it. What would it be like to be a self-governed sage. Another critical power of manas is the power of imagination. To generate an idea in the abstract, to gradually give the idea form, to paint a picture in our imagination of its expression, is the creative power of manas. We know that life works from within without, from thought to action. Manifestation requires a roadmap or blueprint. P.T. Barnum imagined a traveling show full of oddities, fantastic stunts, exotic animals, and the like, and it became the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. J.K. Rowling imagined a whole world for her character Harry Potter and wrote endless stories of his adventures. Michelangelo imagined the figure of David and carved it out of a block of marble. Imagination is a regal power. We should think upon this and think upon it deeply. If I've imagined myself into my current conditions, can I imagine myself out of them into better ones? Pop spirituality and pop psychology focused upon the mask of the personality, private happiness, and self-regard often fails to appreciate the importance of mind and the power of thought. The mind is the impediment. Stop thinking is the panacea. This is a misunderstanding of the long journey of the soul, the pilgrimage of humanity towards enlightenment. When the voice of the silence says, "The mind is the great slayer of the real, let the disciple slay the slayer," it is not talking about all aspects of the mind. It is talking about kama manas, mind captured by fierce private desires. It is talking about the monkey mind that cannot focus and is adept at compartmentalizing for the purpose of self-interest. We should think upon this and think deeply. What is the general direction of my thoughts? The lower mind, like all the other human principles, has 7 levels, we are told. At its highest levels, it is receptive to the whispering of buddhi to manas. At its lowest levels, it has become entirely captive to the raging elephants and the buzzing fireflies of the world, in the words of the voice of the silence. After 18 million years of evolution, mankind has reached a point where the lower mind must fully manifest and mature into a vehicle for the elevation back towards spirit and sublimated matter. Humanity at this juncture of the journey lives in the lower mind. That is where we feel our identity. That is the point of selfhood we now experience. There's nothing negative or pejorative about lower mind. Lower mind in its best state is a bastion of reason and creativity. In its worst, it is tied to desires, deluded by separateness, and either overheated or immensely slothful. Think Rajasic and Tamasic in the context of the Bhagavad Gita. Between higher mind operating on elevated planes outside the range of our awareness and lower mind completely caught up in the world, there's a need to stake a claim to a position in the middle. The middle is where the budding neophyte, the awakening student, creates a beachhead. This is where the neophyte begins to establish some critical distance from the personality. It is a place which is calmer, where one can retreat from the world, a place where one can reflect upon the thoughts, emotions, choices, and actions of the day. We might call it the meditating mind of the middle. This represents the disciple, the Arjuna within, that must fight for dominion of the kingdom. This meditating mind of the middle is inspired by a divine discontent. It is the heart's desire to reunite with its source. It seeks freedom from the shackles of desire mind. It fights to bring attention back to a focus. This mind desires to think things through and adore the spiritual sun, great teachers, noble virtues. To the degree that human consciousness takes up arms and pledges allegiance with Arjuna, within, is the degree to which the individual enters the stream of universal consciousness flowing towards the spiritual sun. We feel the wind at our backs. The universe is on our side. We are in training to become soldiers in the army of the voice. We should think upon this and think deeply. What is blocking me from entering the stream? What is holding me back? Albert Einstein had some observations that seem very helpful in this context.
A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Nobody is able to achieve this completely, but the striving for such achievement is in itself a part of the liberation and a foundation for inner security.
Ego trips, mind games, rationalizations, obsessions, fears, doubts, and every other malady of the mind has nothing to do with real thinking. And one by one must be rooted out, thought through, and transcended by serious self-study. How then can we learn to think for ourselves? How do we fulfill our potential as mind beings? How can real thinking cut through the malaise of selfishness that infuses the society of our times and fuels the monkey mind? First, let's agree with Krishna that real thinking is neither tamasic, meaning passive, or rajasic, call it anxious and overheated. Real thinking would be sattvic, that is to say, cool, calm, and concentrated, what Mr. Judge called higher carelessness. It is the mind in an attentive state, yet receptive, grateful, alert. It is the mental posture of Buddhi Yoga. We might say that learning how to think is somewhat equivalent to learning how to love another human being. It must flow from within without. It cannot be faked and has no technique or formula. Love is the awakening of the heart. When the mind and the heart are in concert, we get what Emerson called man thinking. It is a turning inward. Like music or language, we learn it by doing, by trying it. The joining of heart and mind is embodied in the very word philosophy, love of wisdom. To pursue wisdom out of love is man thinking. And here's Emerson expanding on the idea.
In this view of him, as man thinking, the whole theory of his office is contained. Him, nature solicits with all her placid, all her monetary pictures. Him, the past instructs. Him, the future invites. Is not indeed every man a student, and do not all things exist for the student's behoof? He must settle its value in his mind. What is nature to him? There is never a beginning, there is never an end to the inexplicable continuity of this web of God, but always circular power returning into itself. Therein it resembles his own spirit, whose beginning, whose ending he can never find, so entire, so boundless. To the young mind, everything is individual, stands by itself. By and by, it finds how to join two things and see in them one nature, then three, then 3,000. And so, tyrannized over by its own unifying instinct, it goes on tying things together, diminishing anomalies, discovering roots running underground, whereby contrary and remote things cohere and flower out of one stem. It presently learns that since the dawn of history, there has been a constant accumulation and classifying of facts. But what is classification but the perceiving that these objects are not chaotic and are not foreign, but have a law, which is also a law of the human mind? The astronomer discovers that geometry, a pure abstraction of the human mind, is the measure of planetary motion. The chemist finds proportions and intelligible method throughout matter. And science is nothing but the finding of analogy, identity in the most remote parts. The ambitious soul sits down before each refractory fact, one after another reduces all strange constituents, all new powers to their class and their law, and goes on forever to animate the last fiber of organization, the outskirts of nature, by insight. Thus, to him, the student under the bending dome of day, is suggested that he and it proceed from one root. One is leaf and one is flower. Relation, sympathy, stirring in every vein. And what is that root? Is not that the soul of his soul? A thought too bold, a dream too wild yet, when this spiritual light shall have revealed the law of more earthly natures, when he has learned to worship the soul and to see that the natural philosophy that now is only the first gropings of its gigantic hand, he shall look forward to an ever expanding knowledge as to becoming a creator. He shall see that nature is the opposite of soul, answering to it part for part. One is seal and one is print. Its beauty is the beauty of his own mind. Its laws are the laws of his own mind. Nature then becomes to him the measure of his attainments. So much of nature as he is ignorant of, so much of his own mind does he not yet possess. And in fine, the ancient precept, know thyself, and the modern precept, study nature, become at last one maxim.
Take an idea and give it your full attention. Pick something meaningful to you, burning deep inside you, that you need to understand, to know or discover. Submit the idea to yourself. Drop it into the well of your own consciousness, free of any outside influence, and see what happens. You don't need a PhD, a master's degree, or even a college education to do some real thinking. In fact, for many, those things might just be impediments. Like Socrates teaches, we need to brush away the false knowledge before we can get to the real thing. The natural reaction to submitting an idea to oneself is the emergence of a question. Questions are the motor power of thought. Questions are to thought what wind is to sailing. It is the agent of growth and movement. And like sailing, We must tack back and forth to proceed ahead. Genuine questions are born out of an uncertainty. We must learn to be comfortable with uncertainty, to be patient with it, actually to embrace it. Given sufficient time and effort, what is unknown will become known. You cannot be on a quest without a question. Philosophy, Theosophy itself, is all about questions. What is real? What is important? What is immortal? Who am I? A good question leads to a better question, which leads to a great question. Staying with a question, seeing it through, which could take days, weeks, years, even lifetimes, is what Plato called metanoia, thinking things through. It's such a beautiful idea, thinking things through to their logical conclusions. The Buddha started his journey to enlightenment with a question: what is the source of human suffering? He persisted until the answer was revealed to him. Metanoia. So it is important to give ourselves time to think, space in our lives to ponder, to wonder, time to meditate and contemplate. This is one of the terrible casualties of modern life. We have no time for thought. Usually we want quick results. Usually we want others to answer our questions. This belies a certain lack of self-reliance. Is it not true that I am the microcosm of the macrocosm? Is it not the case that the kingdom of heaven is within me? Am I not a child of the solar and lunar spiritual petries, the spiritual intelligences of the universe? Why should I not trust myself? Ask your questions to others only after you have put them to yourself, and give your higher nature a chance to speak. At the very least, it will prepare you for the answer when it comes. And even if the answer comes from a child, comic strip, a friend, a fellow student in a discussion group, it will still feel like it came from within because you were ready and you recognized it. We learn to withhold judgment until after we understand a proposition. Kindly to judge, as Shakespeare says. We learn to be skeptical and submit every idea to the crucible of our own best thinking. We learn to be humble because we keep glimpsing how much there is to know. And we celebrate the vastitude rather than despair over it. Rather like a child who, when first learning to read, is thrilled at the prospect of entering a library full of books. We learn to be flexible, to look at things from multiple points of view, like the facets of a diamond. We train ourselves to review all statements and proclamations in context. Everything has a context, an environment, a universe in which it dwells. What is that context? Proof of our growing flexibility is the capacity to see an idea through the eyes of others. And we learn to disagree with kindness, courage, and grace. And I might add, respect. We come to learn that thinking is about ideas, and ideas rule the world. Ideas presented by great teachers are metaphysical realities that are like the sun and the moon and the planets, which only appear to be distant and beautiful, but in fact are very personal and immanent. They are living universal forces. Theosophical philosophy encourages us to be holistic and synthetic in our thinking. Every idea is connected to every other idea in a radical unity. To expand one is to expand them all. The aim is to get closer, as Einstein recommended, to a universal perspective. Our teachers tell us that the ideal is truth at a distance. So we continue our meditation, contemplation, adoration. We're invited to think analogically, to use an idea we currently grasp to lead to a higher one we presently do not. Mankind has been taught from time immemorial through stories, through analogies. The soul within hungers for inspiration, struggles to shake off sleep and awaken. The unexamined life is not worth living, Socrates tells us. And we should add, an uninspired life is not good enough for the pilgrim soul. Real thinking is not real unless it leads to real doing. Thinking inspires experiments in the world, experiments with truth, as Gandhi would put it. It leads to practices and disciplines of conduct. A good theory is worthy of a corresponding practice. Life in a body is a privilege because it is the only time we can test our ideas. The cycle must be completed. Practice leads to new questions, and the cycle continues, and that without end. In a way, all the questions we have blend into one another and unite into a current of adoration for reality, truth, and the self of all creatures. Call it what you like. And that is why real thinking of this sort is all kind of worship, really. The potential of thought in its highest sense is self-realization. And with that, I will turn over the stage to my good friend, Francis, for our third and last lecture.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Let me try to share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. I was thinking, thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Pierre, for explaining my own presentation. Even before you saw it. So, regarding thoughts, I would like to warm up with a quote related to thought from HPB. And let me organize something here. Here we go. On the complex nature of manas, individuality, universality, union with the self, and thought. So I was wondering, Jerry, would you like to read on my behalf? There are those 2-3 paragraphs. I like your voice.
I was enjoying it being quiet. Try to imagine a spirit, a celestial being, whether we call it by one name or another, divine in its essential nature, yet not pure enough to be one with the all, and having, in order to achieve this, to so purify its nature as to finally gain that goal.
Go ahead. Continue if you can.
It can, let's see.
If you see my screen.
I can see it. I thought I had muted myself. It can do so only by passing individually and personally, that is, spiritually and physically, through every experience and feeling that exists in the manifold or differentiated universe. It has, therefore, after having gained such experience in the lower kingdoms, and having ascended higher and still higher with every rung of the ladder of being, to pass through every experience on the human planes. It is in its very essence, it is thought, and is therefore called in its plurality, Manasa, Putra, the sons of the universal mind. This individualized thought is what we Theosophists call the real ego, the thinking entity imprisoned in a case of flesh and bones, from the Key to Theosophy.
Thank you, Jerry. So let's think about thought. Our thoughts to analyze thought. So where are we going with this? I would like to suggest we look into what is a thought, where does it come from, where does it come from? Can thinking alone comprehend thinking? And what or who comprehends thoughts? That should get us started. So on the origin of thought, I have 3 slides. This first one is considering some attributes of a thought. You can think that a thought has some intelligence, some direction, some creativity, some energy. Well, it must come from somewhere. Intelligence must be coming from the source of intelligence. Direction must be coming from a deeper direction. Creativity must be coming from the source of creativity. Energy also must be coming from the source of energy. The message here, a thought must have its source. Secondly, let's look into the abstraction with a very simple example of thoughts. Here it is. Let us learn Theosophy. Let us learn the key to Theosophy. Let us harness the power of our group to learn the key to Theosophy. Let us study the key to Theosophy by alternating personal research and group discussions to validate our learning and acquire more knowledge. Question: which of the above thoughts is the most abstract and which one most concrete? So this is a question to the audience so that we can do this together. If you would like to answer, please raise your hand using the raising hand feature we have on Zoom. Hopefully everybody is more or less familiar with this. And then when you raise your hand, it should show on top of the list of the participants on my screen, on the presenter. So this is the first time we do it, so maybe we have a little bit of a cold start, but go ahead. Which of the above thoughts is the most abstract and which one is most concrete? Anyone would like to answer this? And then I don't know whether everyone knows how to raise their hand.
It depends a little bit, Francis, by what you mean here by the key to Theosophy. Are you referring to the book, or are you referring to the actual key that opens up the understanding of Theosophy?
Thank you, Pierre, for clarifying. No, we are just looking at the sentences we have written. I just picked a topic that we are all familiar with, which is to learn Theosophy, but they are just sentences that we are analyzing. It could be any topic. Okay, Joseph raised his hand. Please go ahead, say something.
Well, I imagine the fewer the words, the more abstract.
Okay. And then would you like to say which one, to your opinion, is the most concrete?
I imagine the more words, the more concrete.
Yeah. And let's see. So in which order are the above thoughts organized? If you look into the abstraction and concrete, we're saying the most concrete is number 1, the most abstract is number 4. Obviously, those sentences have been organized from the most abstract to the more concrete. And you're right, it goes with the number of words, for sure. But if you think about it, when it says on number 1, let us learn Theosophy, then let us learn the key to Theosophy is more concrete. Let us learn Theosophy is more abstract, but they are the same subject matter. Alain would like to say something.
If we go to the definition of Kama Deva, in the glossary, we see that the first thinking process was a collective process. So in that case, we could say that the collective thought is more abstract. Sorry. Somewhere. Sorry.
And this is not the first time that this type of discussion goes back and forth between the most concrete and the most abstract, and that they tend to be inverted. But we'll discuss that. So, are the more concrete thoughts in conflict with their more abstract predecessors? Assuming the most concrete is one, the most abstract is one, and the most concrete is four. If you look at two of those thoughts, is the more concrete thought in conflict with with its more abstract predecessor? What do you think? Anyone would like to answer that? Yes, Joseph, you're the one who has raised his hand.
Trying to keep things moving here. Well, I think no, it wouldn't be in conflict, because in some sense, the process of concretion that you're talking about is sort of a specialization. So the principle isn't lost in the specialization, it's just being applied and qualified in more particulars.
Yeah. And then when you look into, let's say, number one and number two is not in conflict with number one, which is the more abstract expression of it. But you're right, number two is more specialized in the sense that it's picking one book. Excuse me about that. It is picking the key to Theosophy. It has selected that one. Another one could have been selected. So the more abstract is more open. There is a greater amount of possibilities. More concrete is getting more specialized and is getting closer to tell us what to do. Number four is describing what we're going to do. So what we have here, before I talk about it, hang on a second, Pierre. Thoughts have different levels of abstraction. That was the main idea here. Yes, Pierre, go ahead.
Well, at the same time, when we start from the most abstract, and we could say, let's call that ideas, then let us learn the key to Theosophy. That idea becomes sort of crystallized, and of necessity turns into thought, because that's how we're going to exchange it among each other. So we see, as we descend from the abstract to the concrete, that there is more and more a crystallization of the original idea to ultimately, in number four, end up with language. And then we see that language is a reduction of thought, and thought is a reduction of ideas. So in that sense, it doesn't mean that that they are in conflict with each other, but they are being reduced and crystallized from the original idea.
Yeah. Crystallized, and also, excuse me, the fact that you said reduced, because you have so many possibilities in the more abstract. But in order to take a direction, you pick one direction. You pick something. Here you pick a book. And then, therefore, that's how you reduce the field of all possibilities, and you focus on something much more concrete. But you said something about abstraction also, which we are going to look into now, which is the concept of beyond thoughts. And here we have 3 or 4 sentences. We desire happiness. We feel knowledge may bring us happiness. Theosophy is an ocean of knowledge. Let us learn Theosophy. Is the first statement a thought? And if not, what is it? I would suggest, or let's say, this is the nature of the mind. Okay. Oops. And we feel knowledge may bring us happiness. We could say this is an abstract thought. You know, it is a feeling. I feel knowledge may bring us happiness, or we feel that. Number 3, that is in knowledge. This is a thought that is expressing knowledge. And number 4, this is a thought, which is, I call it here an action thought, which was the first one we had in the previous slide. So we went from something very abstract, which is really a desire, maybe a faint desire, then some abstract thinking about the knowledge, and finally we went up to, or down to, a thought that is going to be pushing us towards an action. So the conclusion we would propose here is that an action is spurred by thought that in turn has its more abstract origin. We went on this slide more abstract than the previous one. So what have we looked into so far? Into source, abstraction, origin, and action. Source. A thought has its source. Thoughts have different levels of abstraction. Origin. The origin of a thought is more abstract and more universal than the thought itself. Action. A thought may spur an action. And all that with some very simple investigation on a few sentences. In other words, I'm pretty much stating the obvious. Now, I'd like to take a hint from the Bhagavad Gita about chitta, or thought, and manas, the mind. On chapter 6, verse 19, you can see chitta here, which is underlined. In English, a lamp which does not flicker in a windless place. To such is compared the yogi of subdued thought, practicing union with the self. So it's interesting here, it is mentioning thought and practicing union with the self. Well, chitta, presented here as subdued thought, is that aspect of the mind which is quiet and silent, which is a quiet and silent collection of impressions or seeds of desires. Now, for those who are familiar with this is not samadhi, this is right before. In other words, you're not lost in the absolute, but you are aware of all these thoughts, all these impressions, all these silent collections and seeds of desire, but nothing is moving. You could think of chitta as being like water without ripples. Now, chitta is called manas or mind only when those ripples arise. That's the thoughts. So we have a level of silence and we have a level of concretization. That silence is getting, in chitta, the first chitta here, that silence is potential. And when there are ripples, when there starts being some activity, thoughts arise. So thought is at deepest level of manifestation. Why? Because this is right before samadhi. So now we're looking at thoughts. We understand they have layers of abstraction. How far does it go in the abstraction? How far does it go? Well, it goes very far. Now let's look into Atma. And then to get started, let's look into the secret doctrine. I added the word Atma in this. The quotation is what is written after that. The first proposition is that there is one underlying unconditioned indivisible truth, variously called the absolute, the unknown root, the one reality, and so on. It is causeless and timeless, and therefore unknowable and non-describable. It is beingness rather than being. However, transient states of matter and consciousness are manifested in it in an unfolding graduation from the subtlest to the densest. You know, from the subtlest to the densest, that reminds me our march towards abstraction and concrete, the final of which is physical plane. According to this view, manifest existence is a change of condition and therefore neither the result of creation nor a random event. Everything in the universe is informed by the potentialities present in the unknown root, potentialities, unknown root, and manifest with different degrees of life, of energy, consciousness, and matter. So, let's try to draw a little picture of this, and then what HPB is describing here, I'm saying, matches the Vedic Atma. We said the yogi practicing union with the self. So the self is universal. The yogi is an individual. Universal versus individual. That is something I would like to explore a little bit. Let's start with Atma that we just talked about. That's universal, the transcendental being, the transcendental self. And then that always cracked me up. Maya, that which does not exist. So it's very interesting. There is also avidya, ignorance. Avidya really is just a coarser form of Maya. However, Atma, the transcendental self, under the influence of avidya, appears as Jiva, also called monad in Theosophy, and that is the individual cosmic existence. So it's very interesting that we need ignorance for the individual to exist. This is the jiva is what remains from incarnation to incarnation. Everything else is destroyed. Jiva, which experiences chitta, subdued thought. That's what we had in the previous verse, in the Bhagavad Gita verse. Who is experiencing that? The individual. But let's remember, it's individualized cosmic existence. So we are still talking of Atma. It is just a reflection of it. And when there are ripples, that becomes the mind, manas. Who hosts thoughts? Manas. And thoughts are the instigators of actions. Thoughts experienced by the individualized cosmic existence, jiva, have their origin in the universal transcendental self, Atma, and may spur actions. So that would be the plain English description of what we just went over. I like the fact that we say experienced by the individualized cosmic existence, jiva, as opposed to saying experienced by us. But it is the same. Now, the origin in the universal transcendental self, Atma, of course, Atma is unmanifest, but when we say a thought has a source of energy, has a source of dynamism, has a source of intelligence, what do you think that source is? Obviously, it goes down to Atma, and that source must be unlimited. which links us to the human potential. The unlimited, the field of all possibilities, is where we are straight from it. Of course, we need a little ignorance to look at ourselves the way we are looking at ourselves, but this is what we are. Our thoughts, our actions, everything are coming from unlimited potential. So far our investigation is that thought, instigator of action, will present a specific level of abstraction, the deepest being closest to the individualized cosmic existence. Jiva, that removal of its limitation, is but the universal transcendental self, Atma. And this is just for your convenience, a reminder of the first quote we had from HPB that Jerry read for us. So, thinking about that, thinking where we are coming from, where our thoughts are coming from, considering that those thoughts are so fundamental and they are really the link between the universal and our actions in life, I was wondering where are we going to stop the discussion? Because we certainly could keep going. So let's propose a few subject matters, and then Jerry will decide whether we have time to get into those. Power, appropriateness, coherence, reality check, thought, and the divine. Those are just a few that we could be talking about. Power. What is the power of a thought? If it has any power, how can we ensure a thought is appropriate and beneficial to self as well as the whole universe? And of course, the power is unlimited. Coherence. Why would we experience coherent, useful thoughts, and why would we experience an uncontrollable stream of apparently random thoughts? Reality check. How can a man claim he understands what thought means when all he's been doing is analyzing thoughts with other thoughts? My favorite one, thought and the divine. What relationship is there between a thought and the divine, or our Father in secret, that Spirit of God of which our body is the temple and in which it dwelleth? Those terms being given to us by HPB in secret doctrine. So this is the point where we can decide to either comment or ask questions about the presentation we just looked at, possibly get into one of these questions or other questions. I would like to open it to everyone, and with Jerry, Judy raised her hand. Jerry, can we have Judy speak?
Yes, absolutely.
Judy, please.
Thank you for 3 wonderful presentations, and to the reader as well. I'm wondering about the very important sentence in the voice of the silence. Of course, they're all vital, but it says, "Thou must feel thyself all thought, yet cancel all thoughts from out thy soul." And the great master Dogen says that you must try not to think, but try not to think. And it seems that Zen Master Dogen is really echoing what the voice of the silence is trying to get us to do, which is so very difficult. In other words, all the discursive mind has been shut off, and we are all thought, yet we have no thoughts. Is this what that sentence means? Do I understand it properly?
Are you referring to a sentence that was in the presentation by any chance? Or just the one you read?
Francis, let's turn the presentation up so we can see everybody.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank
there,
you.
everybody.
Yeah, we're all together. So Judy's question, would anyone like to respond to that? What does the voice of the silence mean when it says that we should quiet all thoughts to absorb ourselves in all thought?
Yes,
Feel thyself all thought, and yet exile all thoughts from out thy soul.
yes, exactly.
So Joe, elaborate. What does that mean to you?
Well, it's probably some advanced stage of samadhi that's beyond me. So I don't know that it can mean a lot literally, but I think it's important to recognize there's a difference between thought and the power of attention, that the power of attention can be directed in all kinds of ways. And the activity of thought is just one area where the power of attention can be directed. And I think that we do, it seems to me, in my own experience, I think we do become full of too much thought a lot of times. I think thought becomes compulsive and uncontrolled. And in that way, it does slay the real. We lose our awareness. We lose the feeling of connection with other people and with a deeper reality within ourselves. So I think that kind of compulsive thinking, certainly in my experience, somehow the attention becomes in bondage to it, and therefore I think it's interesting that in yoga traditions, in Patanjali we find this, that you are trained to learn to direct the attention elsewhere, to begin to experience the range of attention as larger than the thoughts that you're involved in. So, I mean, for me, in a practical way, it means that I kind of try to remind myself all during the day, and I'm a very busy business owner, and there's many activities and many jobs we're involved in and employees to manage. But I try to, at any given time, say, all this preoccupation that I'm experiencing right now is, let me experience as maybe only 50% of my being, and try to experience the empty space around that thought. Try to recognize, try to not to feel so full that I can't move,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's a step in that direction of that very memorable aphorism from the Voice of the Silence for me.
Yeah, it's rich in meaning for sure, certain. Before we turn to Ava's thoughts, I just wanted to remind everybody that if you take your cursor to the bottom of the screen of your Zoom window, you'll see a menu pop up, and in that menu it'll say reactions, and in that you'll see a button that says raise hand, and there's too many of you for me to see everybody all at once. So, ordinarily when we have discussion groups, I can see people leaning forward, or I can sense or see your hand go up if you have your video on. But I won't know if you want to speak unless you use that feature right there, that raised hand feature. And also it kind of puts you in line for me as well. So please use that if you can. If not, just get my attention somehow, kind of in between other people speaking. Okay, with that being said, Ava, I'm so sorry. We'd like to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think it's very much in the line of what Joe was pointing out, because the lower mind is fragmentation by definition. So the lower mind is many different thoughts, and it sort of fractionizes the mind. And so all thought, I would presume, is guiding towards unity. And it seems somehow to be connected also to the dilemma of the idea of separateness, which is, the fractionized mind, and to unity, which gets away with the idea of separateness.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ava. Pierre, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, well, there is, if you're looking to, it's a book published by the Theosophy company, Theosophical Articles and Notes, and there's a section there on Devachan in which one of the sections is expressed in the words of of an adept. And I think it illustrates very well what Judy was referring to. He says, according to esoteric doctrine, this evolution that eventually leads to nirvana or samadhi is not viewed as the extinguishment of individual consciousness, but its infinite expansion. So there you already have the connection with all thought. And then he says the entity is not obliterated, but united with the universal entity, and its consciousness becomes able not merely to recall the scenes of one of its earth-evolved personalities, but of each of the entire series around the Kalpa, and then those of every personality. In short, from being finite, it becomes infinite consciousness. So I see a correspondence here between our individualized thoughts and the all thought, the expansion of consciousness encompassing all thought. What else can you say about it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're seeing a continuum here. Francis, go ahead.
Yes, Pierre just described in some specific wording what the Bhagavad Gita describes. That is exactly the same in a slightly different language, but that's what it is. Having our awareness or experience with the more abstract or subtler form of thoughts, and subtler and all that, as it was mentioned earlier, it is samadhi, but it is not the disappearance of the individual. It is the individual experiencing unbounded awareness, experiencing the essence of everything, all thoughts, all feelings, and therefore experiencing maximum potential. So then when one comes back to regular functioning, then one has greater potential within himself. It's interesting that you in this process where you go from specific to universal, you do not disappear in the universal, hopefully.
Thank you,
Thank
Francis. Arnie, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thought is integral to evolution. In Theosophy, the evolution from the mineral kingdom to the plant kingdom and on to the animal kingdom and finally to this human cycle is all triggered by thought. It is said that even the minerals have to have this thought. Out of this thought, there's an intention for it to evolve into the next form of existence, which is the plant kingdom. So thought, as we see, the cycle or the process engineering of thought, as explained in Theosophy, from what I understand, from thought, there is an intention. From the intention, there is a action or karma. And out of this action evolves the evolution of the consciousness and also evolution to the state of being. So this I thought I could share with you. Over.
Thank you, Arnie. Thank you very much. Yeah, you could say that all of manifestation is a divine thought. So, I mean, one thing that I'm discovering through our time together today is that we can see a hierarchy of concepts or notions of what thought is, from the highest to the lowest. Maybe we could also introduce the idea on the human plane of health and illness in regards to thought. Thoughts that are beneficial, thoughts that are malevolent. You know, thought is something that means very different things from each different plane or hierarchy of life. So isn't it the case that in Theosophy we're invited to take an idea like thought itself and try to expand upon it, try to deepen it? It seems to me almost all the ideas that are introduced to us in Theosophy kind of revolutionize our current way of thinking of things. You know, could it be that our very notion of thought is inadequate, isn't sufficient to really understand it? Go ahead, Pierre.
I think we have to think of HPB's formula here in volume 1 of the Secret Doctrine, which you find on pages 20 and 21, that abstract formula of which he speaks. And we find that reflected also in other books, like for instance, Patanjali, where he says that on every plane, we conceptualize things, and that refers to the realm of thought. And so you have to come to a point when you think things through, more and more abstract, that it becomes non-conceptual. But here is the rub. If you then reach a higher plane, what was before to you non-conceptual becomes on that higher plane, again, conceptual. So the two, non-conceptual and conceptual, are relative to one another. And that's basically HPB's idea of the abstract formula. She gives expression to that when she discusses the waking up of the first beings in the universe on page 380 in volume 1 of the Secret Doctrine, where she says the moment that infinite potential of the first logos manifests itself as the demiurge, which is the builder of the universe, he has to first perceive the ideas in the, how you call that again? The archetypal world, he says. So in other words, the moment that manifestation takes place, you have conceptualization. But of course, don't think of that concept as a concept on our plane. So the idea of non-conceptual and conceptual are just relative to the perceiver.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important to keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes some people speak a little bit, they're downplaying the idea of having thoughts and concepts. And HPB in the very beginning in volume 1 on page 3 in the footnotes, she says, we do not apologize as theosophists or as conceptualists. She calls theosophists conceptualists. Yeah.
That's why I've always loved the that image that Emerson offers, that the life of man is a self-evolving circle. That the object of the aspirant, the disciple, the neophyte, is to move towards universality, move towards greater illumination, move towards greater understanding. And there's a certain inadequacy to each one of the circles, but it leads to the next one. And you can't really jump over the steps any more that you can leap to the top rung of a ladder in one step. I wanted to ask Elena if she had any thoughts or questions about either what we're talking about or the things we've talked about today. Elena, can we hear from you? And make sure you unmute so we can hear you. Okay, well, we're waiting for Elena. Maybe she stepped away for a moment. Francis, go ahead.
Yes, elaborating on concepts. When you think just at our own level, you could sometimes sit down and feel your desires, feel the main ideas that are driving this moment of your life, and be very quiet. They are in your awareness. You are not elaborating anything whatsoever. You are just letting your attention float on them. And it is a more abstract way of thinking, although those are not really thoughts. if you consider the main discoveries, what scientists or philosophers have done, and they had those feelings, they had those abstract thoughts, and they said, no, I need to share that with the rest of the world, whether it is the scientific world or the world of philosophy. They have to formulate it. They will formulate it, maybe work days, months, or years on that. Then they can share it with the world. Where did it start from? It started from something abstract, a feeling, something that they could identify, but that was not formulated, even though they knew exactly what it was. So I like what I heard when you said that theosophers do not apologize for contemplating or concepts. It is a part of our mind, and whatever those concepts might be, however abstract they might be, does not mean they are right. They are not right. It really means they are something important that of course has its source in the I would say infinite reservoir of knowledge and creativity. That's where it comes from. And it is abstract in our mind, but it comes from that. It comes from the universal, and that is why some of those feelings, abstract concepts, are so powerful. That's because they come from there.
Yeah, there are good and there are bad concepts.
Right. Well, the very word concepts related to the word conceive has to do with giving birth. So if you follow that logic, the process of conceptualization is to bring something from the higher into the lower. It's to give birth into the world, to manifest something. This is a distinctly human activity, something that's immensely beautiful. We think about the great symphonies that have been written, or the ragas that have been written. Think about all the great art, cinema, all the wonderful novels. These are conceptualizations. This is giving birth to ideas. So, when we talk about human potential, this is at the apex of our capabilities. This is where you might say our opportunity to make a difference in the world is the most seminal. It's in the field of thought. I'm also anxious to discover what Russ Law is thinking. Do you want to add any of your thoughts to what we're talking about, Russ? I seem to have lost Russ too.
Oh, I've got it unmuted.
There you are.
No, this has been a great presentation, and I just don't have anything to add at this time.
Thanks, Russ.
I just sent a text on Elena's cell phone in case she would still be around.
Yeah. Any thoughts or comments from that anyone would like to bring up? We've got just a little bit more time.
Well, I think it is important that we not lose the idea of manas or concepts. I remember once when I was at graduate school, another graduate student remarked about the religious studies department at UC Santa Barbara. This is manas, this is nothing. And we can't bypass manas. We can't bypass thinking before we go to Buddhi, the Atman. And I think that's very important. And I've had friends say to me, I just can't meditate. I said, then, well, read Patanjali, read the Bhagavad Gita, read the Voice of the Silence, read about meditation, and you'll learn, rather than saying, I can't. That's the best way to fail at anything. We know that. So I'm so glad that all these presentations have brought out the importance of thought and how we think about thought and how we think about not thinking also. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, like everything else in life, there's skill that's gained, strength and stamina, and ability that comes through use. So we get better at whatever it is we want to do by practicing it and trying it. And I find this true myself as anybody else, is that there's a fear of, launching into some arena in our lives that we're not good at. I mean, most adults completely avoid things that they don't have skill or ability about. When you're a little child, when you're young, nothing's easy. Everything's new and difficult, it seems. And children throw themselves into learning how to write, learning how to spell, and all of these things that they're not good at. That should be no different, no matter what your age is. And there is an infinite potential in the capacity to think. You cannot exhaust the capabilities there, according to what Pierre was telling us earlier. So rather than despair over the fact that maybe we're not that good at it, maybe just get busy trying and start the practice. Go ahead, Pierre.
Well, I think we have severe misconceptions about what meditation actually entails, because we think of people sitting in a lotus position and thinking about nothing or something, but nothing doesn't exist. So you have to think about something. And if you look into Patanjali, Patanjali himself actually points out, you could say, one of the most aspects of meditation for people on the level of our study, and that's on page 7, verse 17, where it says there is a meditation of the kind called that in which there is distinct cognition, and which is of a fourfold character because of argumentation, deliberation, beatitude, egoism. And then Mr. Judge gives some notes about it. So it doesn't mean that meditation is just sitting there with nothing. You can take a subject of whatever you're studying and think it through, bring up, argue with yourself about what you're reading and what you're thinking. And that's already meditation. It's not a samadhi or anything of that level yet. But if you keep things thinking through, ultimately you will get deeper and deeper in your meditations.
Mm-hmm.
I think we sometimes are a little bit too highfalutin about meditation.
Yeah. Susan, go ahead. Your turn.
I was curious about the nature of struggle. We've been talking a lot about that, the struggle to think more deeply, the struggle to meditate. So there seems to be a tremendous benefit to struggling, which we often find very annoying to us personally, but I was trying to sort of broaden my idea of what struggle is and how it benefits the whole.
Well, that's such a great question. Yeah, I'm dying to weigh in on that just a little bit. If you think about an athlete, let's say a distance runner, what do they do for trainings to maximize their potential? Well, they devise a training routine where they push their body to the limits, and they do it over and over and over again. Now, if you've done any running, I did a little bit in high school. It hurts. It's painful. It's not particularly fun to push yourself to the point where your muscles start to burn and your breathing becomes strained. But that's precisely what the distance runner does. And they do it over and over and over again to maximize and strengthen their capacities. Why wouldn't that be the case with our our mental functions with our thought, you would assume that nature has the same process for all of its evolution, that there has to be a little bit of strain to it. But the thing that's different, I think, in this case is it's self-chosen. And then the runner actually gains a great deal of contentment in challenging themselves and pushing themselves. And same with the mountain climber and in other disciplines we could think about. The musician who's trying to master some difficult piece. Yeah, it's not particularly fun to, struggle over, a couple of bars in the song, but with practice, one masters it. And then there's a sense of contentment about gaining a new level. So I think this is true. I think for those of us who are pursuing this philosophical life, I think we come to appreciate the fact that there's some strain to it and respect the process. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that struggle issue, and I suppose this is where thought comes in as well. All struggle is not equal, and all of us have our own svadharma, our own particular circumstances, our particular abilities, and I think it probably becomes wrong-headed to struggle in the wrong direction. Just as if you were walking through a hallway and you decide you want to try to walk through the wall, you could put your head against the wall and you could break a sweat, and it would just be stupid bullheadedness to try to walk through the wall. There wouldn't be we wouldn't admire that kind of struggle. So it seems as though we need some kind of circumspection to realize which directions we should put our efforts into and which ones we shouldn't.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Laura, you had your hand up. I think we might conclude our meeting with what you've got to tell us. So why don't you go ahead, Laura? And that's Laura Gray.
Poon King had a question in chat, Jerry, that
Oh, sorry, Susan.
No, go ahead, Laura.
In thinking about the exercise and the athletic example, with the mind, we have to let go of what we think we know in order to embrace more. And everything that HPB gives us is to take us to that higher plane of being. And if we are attached too much to our own intellect or our own ideas, we will limit ourselves. But when we get to that higher plane, we begin to see the words that she gives us in a whole new light. But we have to be able to unlearn what we know in order to learn what it is that she has to give us.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, I suppose before we do end, we should take up a question that is in the chat. What is the opposite of kama manas? What do we have? Pierre, can you help us with this? What do you think the questioner, if the questioner can, if they want to, you could clarify a little bit? But I think maybe what the questioner is asking about is what is buddhi manas? If we were to take manas and think of it as being dual, then kama manas would be mind that's being dragged into, you might say, lower desires, personalized desires. Buddhi manas would be manas that's focused on the universal, the source, the causal side of life, what's inspiring, what's uplifting, what's noble. Pierre, would you care to add any to that? And then we'll close our meeting behind that.
Well, I think you pretty much answered it yourself, Jerry. The opposite could be buddhi manas, but it depends on how you define the higher principles. But it's basically The opposite of Kama Manas is Kamadeva, and Kamadeva manifests itself through Buddhi Manas, higher Manas. So yeah, in that sense, HPV points that out, that Kama is Buddhi inverted, she says somewhere. But of course, Buddhi inverted cannot operate unless it has a vehicle, Manas, higher Manas, to work through it. So Kamadeva would be a good alternative, or Buddhi Manas. No.
Okay, thank you for that. I wanted to point out in closing that there's a talk this afternoon at the Crotona School for Theosophy that you can get online on Pythagorean harmonics, and I think that starts up in a couple of hours. I put the link in the chat, so if anyone's interested in that, they can check that out. In a week's time, again, at this appointed time of the day, we will take up the next of the two topics of human potential, creativity. We'll have 3 speakers and a discussion that day as well. I want to thank everybody for their participation and attendance and interest in what we're doing here. And I want to wish all of you a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll see you in a week.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jerry.
Jerry.
Hi, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bonsoir à tous.
Thank you.
Jerry, sorry I had to walk away.
Oh, that's okay. That's
Um,
okay. I called on you.
Yes, sorry. The announcement that you made about the Pythagorean harmonics is for next week, and Kirk Radin is giving that.
Got it. I got the wrong day.
Yeah, at the same time as next week's series. Your series next week, 10 a.m.
Right. Well, he's got 2 sessions, I believe. One in the morning, one in the afternoon.
Yeah,
You can view the afternoon one separately if you want to. So someone from your group contacted me and asked that I mention it, which I did faithfully, but got the day wrong. I thought it was today.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That was beautiful what you were, the presentation you gave.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Jerry.
Good to see you, Pablo. All the
Bye,
best to you
everyone.
guys. We'll see you guys soon.
Have a good day.